It's another Friday, and it's another snowpocalypse, or so-called here in Southeast Michigan. I always have to try to throw something at Steve to see, make him keep up so it doesn't get too boring back in the control room there. So I don't know if we can go to the iPad here really quick. I'm just so curious, like when we walk out of here, is it going to be a complete blizzard? Let's find out. So we've got the radar here, and nope, this is the Wonder Map. This is not an endorsement, folks. We're going to see it? Is it going to come up? All right. Oh, I got to select the radar. See, this is not medical devices, so I don't know it. Where's the radar? There's the radar. Okay. Oh, wow. Yep, I think we are kind of getting snowpocalypse here in Southeast Michigan. So hopefully you're somewhere warm where you don't have to go out anymore and you're enjoying MedTech Crossroads with us. We are so glad to have you here. We're going to be talking all about the news today. In fact, we're going to preview one event coming up next week. I'm going to be with Stephen Rapundolo in Washington, D.C., because we're going to be talking with AdvaMed and with congressional delegations all about AdvaMed's policy priorities. So we're going to find out what the medical device industry is interested in when it comes to policy. But more on that later. Right now, we're just glad you're here and hope you enjoy the show. All right. So first of all, I want to remind you that MedTech Crossroads is now on not only YouTube and Zoom live on Fridays, but Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. We're still figuring out how to make sure those get up in a timely manner, but nevertheless, back episodes are increasingly being populated on all those platforms, so you can enjoy the show there. And, one of the goals over time is to get back to interviewees and to topics so that if you want to reference what we've talked about, you can do it. We've heard from mentors who say, hey, we love what you do here. We've even had some of these episodes assigned as homework for startup groups, which is pretty fun. I hope the startup groups feel the same way. So you can get to MedTech Crossroads on all these platforms. We're going to talk here about upcoming events. We like to scour some of the local and national event calendars for the things that we share here. Not every single event, because there's a certain demographic. If you're a mentor, if you're an innovator, if you're a healthcare provider interested in innovation, if you're an investor interested in startups and innovation and new product development, that's what we're catering to here. And so we scan MEDC, MichBio, Project MedTech, RAPS, Ann Arbor Spark, and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, among others. If you've got other calendars you'd like us to be scanning, we're happy to add it to the list. One of the things you're going to notice today about the events, the upcoming events, earlier in the year, we were able to basically maybe put 20 events up on the calendar there, and we were able to say, oh, here's the 20 upcoming events for 2023. I think the year is actually back, like in force. People are actually planning events now. So what we did is we're really only going to show you events through April, because that list has gotten so long and so interesting that we're kind of not going to focus so much on the later part of the year. We'll come back to that time and time again. We will show you big events coming up later in the year, but there's so much happening just in the next couple months that we're going to focus on that. And we're going to start with this, the life science legislative fly-ins, this with MichBio and AdvaMed, the first one here coming up next week. I'm actually going to be in D.C. With Stephen Rapundolo and other representatives from Michigan's bioscience industry. The last time I did something like this was in 2016. We're going to talk in a minute about AdvaMed's legislative priorities. What does a trade group even say? Hey, Congress, we want you to do something. Well, what? Let's talk about that in a minute. But this is coming up next week. We're hoping next Friday to have some updates, not just what got talked about, but how did congressional delegations respond? We find that many of these topics actually hit innovators, especially startups, and their investors, where they're actually living their lives as companies. And so it's really interesting. 2016, the big thing on the table was the medical device excise tax, which was hitting startups before they'd ever made a dime of profit. They were getting hit with a tax that came out pre-profits. And that was a big challenge. So anyways, this is coming up next week. We're going to say more about that in a minute. A2 Biosocial coming up Tuesday, March 7th. Pretzel Bell in Ann Arbor, Matthew Himes. Or if you're online, scan the QR code. You can also get to it at info@a2biosocial.com. This event appears to be another cool recurring one. MichBio seems to be doubling down on this the second Tuesday of the month from 11 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. IP and legal expert virtual coffee break. So michbio.org or scan the QR code if you're watching online. If you have questions for IP and legal experts, you've got a half hour there where you can tune in on the second Tuesday of every month. RAPS, the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, everything you wanted to know about UDI, the Universal Device Identifier. Maybe you don't want to know anything about UDI. I kind of feel that way sometimes. UDI and cybersecurity, I just don't want to know about it anymore. But no, it's important. It is a requirement now. And there's a virtual program coming up also on March 7th, all about Universal Device Identifiers. Test-Driven Development 101. This is from Ann Arbor Spark. This is not med device or MedTech specific, but what Nate Chandler Smith is going to be talking about is such an important topic. Now, he's talking about it from a software perspective. So if you're interested in software, this would be cool. But test-driven development. So many times people come to us and say, what do I need to do? Well, what you need to do depends on what you're going to need to test. And what you're going to need to test depends on your requirements. Do you really understand them? I think that's what he's going to be talking about. And so it should be a good event. Thanks, Ann Arbor Spark, for making us aware of that. The Resi Conference, if you're looking for early stage investment, this would be a good place to show up, March 14th through 16th, virtually. They do have an in-person conference, but that happened in January, and this is their virtual conference, Resi. Medical Device Manufacturers Association 2023 FDA Forum, March 15th through 16th in Palo Alto, California. They call themselves the Voice for Medical Innovation. Should be a good event. And then coming up March 21st and 22nd. Why do we bother throwing this up? Well, maybe because it's in Palm Springs. That would be fun. But FDA Clinical Trial Requirements, Regulations, Compliance, and Good Clinical Practice Conference. Here's a problem that we see many, many, many times. Innovators, especially academic innovators, they say to themselves, I know how to design a clinical trial. I've written so many papers. I know how to design a clinical trial. And unfortunately, there's a big, big disconnect between a clinical trial that you can write a paper on and a clinical trial that's going to satisfy FDA for your device or otherwise product submission. And that's what this is about. Understanding how to do these things so that FDA is going to be okay with it. We would really like to see more early stage innovators, especially academic innovators, take a step back, don't race to that clinical trial, and ask the question, what should I be doing? What's going to get me through FDA? And if you can get that into your clinical trial, you're going to be so much better off. And maybe an excuse to go to Palm Springs. I don't know. Can we justify this one, Steve? I don't think I can justify this one, but
oh boy, I don't know. It might be snowy there right now.
Oh, that's true. They've been having, like, LA actually had snow on the ground, I think, for the first time in 100 years or something. Crazy. Another MichBio event coming up March 30th, the BioConnections Networking coming back. Neogen hosting this. They'll give a facilities tour, 5 to 7 p.m. in Lansing, Michigan. Love these local networking events. And then coming up April 1st, we got this from a listener, Dr. Ovidiu Kaelin. I hope I pronounced that right. Forgive me if I didn't, Dr. Kaelin. An in-person machine learning conference, this at Eastern Michigan University from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. You can register through this QR code. The form address is a little hard, so if you are interested in this conference, and you're just listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, contact us. You can contact us at contact@medtechcrossroads.com, and we would be happy to get this info to you. But if you're online, scan the QR code, and you can get to this machine learning conference. I don't believe it's medical device specific, but this topic is certainly cross-cutting, so we thought it was worth sharing here. U.S. Regulatory Essentials Devices. You can learn a lot about device regulations by listening to MedTech Crossroads. We're very excited about bringing these things to you. But if you want a deep dive, a 2-day deep dive, April 4th and 5th, it's a virtual program put on by RAC, and they're going to have some heavy hitters there. So scan the QR code to get connected, or raps.org, raps.org. The 10X Medical Device Conference. There's a lot of different flavors of medical device conferences in the U.S. every year. 10X seems to be the one where they're just trying to get people together and talk about things and cross-pollinate as much as they can. AdvaMed, for example, is all about regulation and policy and things like that. MedCon and the MD&M show, very much about devices and vendors and components and things like that. But 10X coming back April 11th through 13th in San Diego, California. The QR code will connect you there. We heard about this from our friends at Project MedTech, so thank you, Dwayne and company, for that. Risk management for the full product life cycle. Here's the thing people don't understand about risk management. Risk management isn't a thing you do on day 3 and then you're done with it for the rest of your life. Risk management per 14971, don't you love those standards? Goes on through the entire device life cycle. So the question isn't, am I done with risk management, but have I done what I need to do today? And here's another in-person conference from RAPS, all about how to do that. How do you do design concept through post-market surveillance? Another RAPS session, 2-day again, cybersecurity unauthorized in April, coming up at their global headquarters. The MedCon conference, Columbus, Ohio, co-sponsored by the FDA. This is one to watch. Expect we will be there at this conference in Columbus, Ohio. And I guess that means that I won't personally be in Dublin, but April 25th through 27th, MedTech Strategist Innovation Summit coming up in Dublin, Ireland. MichBio is doing their Life Sciences Showcase May 15th in Lansing, Michigan. It looks like they're bringing together their Medical Device Summit, their Drug Discovery Symposium, their Patient Advocacy Forum, their Cannabis Science Symposium, and their Digital Health Forum, all on the same day, May 15th in Lansing. And finally today on the event announcements, 510K, IDE, and PMA submissions workshops. If you want a deep dive, like I said before, we talk about this a lot on MedTech Crossroads. There are earlier sessions. If you have questions about things like 510Ks, just reach out. We'll connect you on previous sessions. But if you want a concentrated deep dive for 2 or 3 days, for example, on May 15th through 17th, AdvaMed is running a virtual 510K and de novo submissions workshop. Or maybe you want to know how to do an investigational device exemption for your product development. May 18th through 19th, the IDE submissions workshop. So that's about it for the events. Next up, we're going to be talking about FDA and industry news. All right, and before we get to the main news items of the day that we're going to be talking about, as we were getting ready for the show, my colleague Aaron Kerrer, as we were talking about last week's show, the 80369 standard that you may remember, connector interoperability. He went, oh yeah, I talked to a class about that standard maybe it was last year or something like that, and sent me this slide deck. But he made the point to me, and I'm just gonna bring this up, and maybe we'll link these somehow. We were talking last week about how connectors, well, There have been a lot of sad things in the world where, I'm sorry, people's lungs get insufflated with saline or terrible things happen. But Aaron brought to my attention a bright side. There's also been times when connectors that should be compatible aren't. Times when somebody's life could have been saved, and it wasn't because the connectors wouldn't mate up and they couldn't make the connection fast enough. And that's the bright side to this connector interoperability. It's not all negative. By making sure that connectors in a given domain, like breathing systems and driving gases, by making sure that those are compatible for a given device type, you're able to make sure that things can be used when you think they should be able to be used. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. It's a little ray of sunshine there, that it's not all doom and gloom. It's not all bad things happening. But in fact, when you have connectors that are compatible, you can do some pretty cool things. All right, we've got a few news items for you today. The first one that we thought was interesting as we were culling through news items from all over the web about MedTech, healthcare delivery, innovation, policy relating to this. This report from Definitive Healthcare, and we'll give you their address at the end. They've got this very large report realizing the potential of remote patient monitoring. And it's certainly the case that many people that we've talked to are very interested in remote patient monitoring. They call it a precipitous rise. I think of precipitous falls, but not often precipitous rises, and how the industry can send it into orbit. They've got a good marketing writer there. I like this. But they're noting some things that are very emergent, shall we say, exacerbated by the boost in adoption and utilization thanks to COVID-19's early restrictions. So the fact that we were all locked down made telehealth and remote patient monitoring really, really critical. It was like, this is going to happen. There's just no way around it. We're going to call our doctors whether you like it or not, and our doctors are going to call us. So they note that some providers embraced remote patient monitoring. But maybe even more powerfully, the government, CMS, first began reimbursing remote patient monitoring in 2018 under a single CPT code. Doctors know that they have to bill under codes. They may or may not know what the codes are, but their billing departments sure do. And if you don't have a code, you can't bill for it. And then the question is, would I want to do it if I can't bill for it? Well, there is this growth. COVID has boosted it. The government's changes for CPT codes has boosted it. But people are also starting to realize that it's kind of nice not to have to drive to the doctor's office, just to call in. I remember when we had our last child, it was nice to be able to just get on the iPad and have a conversation with the doctor. They also call out the fact that doctors are overscheduled and increasingly burnt out. Now, of course, I don't know if RPM really changes that, because a doctor that's overscheduled and burnt out, if you simply load more things onto them, because now you have RPM, well, we'll see how that pans out. But this is definitely coming. It's something that's here. COVID boosted it. Here are the kinds of things that doctors do have access to today to transmit data for remote patient monitoring: blood pressure cuffs, electrocardiograms, glucose monitors, implanted pacemakers, pulse oximeters, scales, stethoscopes, thermometers, wearable heart monitors. All these things allow you to gather data and send it without having to be in the office. So that's great. It also turns out that Center for Medicare Medicaid has been creating CPT codes slowly. In 2018, there was this one code that they had. Now, why bother with this? Well, if you're mentoring a company, or you're working with a company, or you're investing in a company, this is so critical for them to know. You can go down the road to our friends at Keystone. They can build a device for you. You come to Into Being, we can design a device for you. You can find people who will talk to you about all sorts of things. If you can't sell that device, you're dead in the water. So understanding these CPT codes is so important. And I would say I'm no expert on CPT codes. That's not where we spend our time, but we like learning about it as much as we can. Because here in 2018, CMS had one code, a catch-all code. But in 2019, just before the pandemic, 3 codes were added. Setup of remote monitoring equipment, supplying the patient with it and receiving daily alerts. So now you can get paid for those daily alerts. And monitoring a patient's remote data and interacting to adjust the care plan accordingly. So now there's a way to get reimbursed for these specific things. But then a 4th code came in 2020, which is if you spend more time with the patient, you get more money. Wow, that's actually, we're always complaining about how doctors don't have enough time with the patient, but now they can actually bill for that extra time. That's actually, I don't know, I'm no expert on this, but that seems to me to be a good thing. In fact, here's a timeline of remote patient monitoring code implementations. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 codes since 2018. 10 codes to allow remote patient monitoring to be appropriately reimbursed. And that's kind of cool. So it sure does seem like remote patient monitoring is here to stay. They talk about explosive growth in remote patient monitoring. It's also interesting what areas have the highest share of remote patient monitoring. At the top of the list, internal medicine, followed by cardiology, and then family practice. They've each got 20 to 30% of the procedures. At the very bottom, sleep medicine, I guess because you usually have to be there, allergy and immunology, and psychiatry, which is fascinating. I would have thought that psychiatry would be higher. These have just a fraction of the cases, with everything else kind of in between. Now, they've also got some other interesting information in this. We're not going to cover this entire report. If you want to read it in all of its glory, and it's pretty cool. Definitive Healthcare LLC is the organization that put it out. We'll get you the web address here in just a second. But I want to bring your attention to two other parts of this report. One about demographics in the United States, and the other one about electronic health record systems in the United States. Because whether or not you're interested in remote patient monitoring, Definitive Healthcare shares some really interesting things. It turns out that the procedures for remote patient monitoring, broken up by region in the United States, track very strongly with hypertension diagnoses and diabetes mellitus diagnoses. Those are predominantly in the southeast of the country. You've got percentages as low as like 12% out in the west and southwest. You've got in the 20s in the Midwest and Northeast. But down in the southeast, a lot of health problems, a lot of RPM-related procedures. Interpret that how you want, but that could in fact be a good thing, that what we're seeing is access to people who have less access to healthcare. That could well be the case. Finally, from this report, I just want to bring to your attention, if I can find it here, health record systems. If you believe that you or a loved one are interacting with a health record system, or that you have a device that may be, this is an amazing graphic right here. Epic Systems Corporation has 36.92% of the US market. Oracle Cerner has 22.59%. MedTech, 14%, followed by Evident, Altera, NetSmart, proprietary software. I think that's just proprietary software. And Athena Health and Allscripts. So we're not a single system, but 36% is a pretty big number for Epic Systems Corporation. So again, not directly related to remote patient monitoring, But if you're interested in what kinds of systems you may have to interact with, this is a good little graphic, a good little pie chart to see. Epic, Oracle, MedTech, the leaders there. So I just want to give a shout out here to the folks who made this. Definitive Healthcare, definitivehc.com. They say their mission is to transform data, analytics, and expertise into healthcare commercial intelligence. We benefited from some of that today by taking a look at their report. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll go to the next news item. FDA Class 1 recalls. What is a Class 1 recall? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? It always gets confusing when FDA uses Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 in different ways, meaning different things. Well, Class 1 doesn't mean simple or low concern. Class 1 in this case means biggest concern. This means a recall that is for problems with the potential to cause serious injury or death. The firm Sedgwick did a study, although we're showing you the MedTech Dive report on this by Nick Paul Taylor. And they say that the number of Class 1 medical device recalls in 2022 hit a 15-year high, the highest it's been in 15 years. There were 70 Class 1 recalls, some of which we've reported on the show. Over the previous 5 years, there were only 47 such recalls. And 18 of these happened in the fourth quarter of 2022. They say that mislabeling was the most common reason for the recalls. And the number of recalled units has gone up to about 62 million. That's a lot of units. That's a lot of disruption, both for the people who might have suffered from this, the loss of units on the market, and certainly for the companies that were forced to recall these. Software accounted for 15 recalls in the final 3 months of the year. And so one of the most visible ones that we've talked about on the show before, a year ago, FDA used their power, their 518 authority, to tell patients for Philips, to order Philips to tell patients about its respiratory device recall because the company wasn't trying hard enough. That's what the agency said anyways. So these recalls really, really going up. I think it does remain an outstanding question. Is this something that has any relation to COVID? Is there any kind of a sense in which companies weren't trying as hard, weren't able to do as much during COVID? Is that why we're seeing all these recalls? Or are these recalls a result of FDA's increased scrutiny? I'm sure the agency would like to say we're looking harder and so we're finding more things. Or is this, in fact, a result of deregulation? Well, we have to account for all of these things. We've reported on the show before how certain medical devices certainly have found themselves in a position where if they hadn't been deregulated, they would have caught certain things that then led to a recall. So what's the reason for these? We don't know. But for any company that's trying to go to the market, you certainly have to be aware that FDA is doing their job to get out there and find out what does need to be recalled and making sure it gets off the market. Next up, AdvaMed's Medical Innovation Agenda for the 118th Congress. That's referring to the US Congress because, as you may have heard before, medical device regulation can only change so much without an act of Congress in the United States. And so trade groups like AdvaMed or MDMA advocate for how do we take care of patients, how do we take care of medical device companies, how do we take care of the environment, how do we take care of everything. And I'll skip across the early part here, this document from AdvaMed. I think this is part A to a conversation that we're going to have next week because I'm actually going to have the privilege to be on Capitol Hill with MichBio, Stephen Rapundolo from MichBio, and others from the Michigan ecosystem in partnership with AdvaMed. We like to stay abreast and into being of what's going on in policy so that as we're guiding clients through the medical device development process, they don't completely lose sight of what's happening in the changing landscape of regulation. But as a result, in some sense, it's like we don't really have a dog in the race, but we're interested in knowing what is industry asking for? And then secondly, how is the government responding to it? In 2016, when I had the privilege of being on Capitol Hill and getting to sit in on these meetings where the medical device excise tax, a tax that hit companies before they had even made a profit, was the item on the table, we found a drastic difference between congressional delegations, including Michigan's Senate delegations, their senators. One would say, we won't name names right now, one would say, this is actually really, really bad because we're stifling innovation. This is just one more way to stifle innovation. We shouldn't be doing it. Even though I'm on the same side of the aisle as my colleague, and we go down the hall and we talk to the colleague, and it's like, yep, same side of the aisle, but I think there's other priorities. I'm not really that concerned about innovation. So medical device excise tax, let's just have it. We need to pay for other things, so we're just going to put this burden on this part of the industry. Such dramatic opinions. I felt like you couldn't get that from the news. You almost had to be there. Now, there's a lot of things on this list. And at the top level, they all sound a little bit aspirational, if we're honest. It's a little bit like, okay, we're going to improve patient access to breakthrough medical technologies. But more specifically, what AdvaMed is calling out is that even though breakthrough pathways exist for regulation, oftentimes you can't get access to these devices as they go through the pathway. Because like we were saying a moment earlier, how you reimburse it, and how people actually get paid for using the device, may have not been established yet. We just talked about CMS codes, where there were 10 new CMS codes over the last 5 years, just for remote patient monitoring. Well, let's say you have a new life-saving device, you get through a breakthrough device pathway or a similar program like the STEP program, and you get out there and no one can buy it. No one can access it. And you're waiting for months or years for people to get access to that. So there's a couple of initiatives making their way to provide pathways to get emerging medical technologies to market. That's number one. Number two is this, and I found this one interesting. AdvaMed is advocating that U.S. devices should be able to go to China. That's interesting, just going to leave that out there. But level the playing field for better patient access to U.S. medical technologies in China. It's a fast-growing medical device market. Are our devices accessible over there? That's something they're advocating for. Ensure the continuity of patient. This one gets me because this one is so true. We were in Dusseldorf in November. We literally had companies coming up to us and saying, we can't stay on the market in Europe. Now, it's a problem for European companies, but it's also a problem for U.S. companies that want to be on the market in Europe. As we reported a few weeks ago, Europe actually just punted. They just said, we're trying to change these regulations. We realize we've made it too hard. We're punting it out a few more years for the implementation of these. But AdvaMed calls this out. There's a serious implementation issue with EU's medical device and in vitro diagnostic regulations. Can we do anything here? Can we do anything from the US side to make sure that that's taken care of? Japan also, they have concerns about stable, consistent medical device policies. And in India and Indo-Pacific economic frameworks, there's concerns there as well. Now, this one you'll all remember: secure American MedTech supply chain resilience. Personally, I kind of like what they're saying here because they're not saying we need to stock more ventilators. We know that the U.S. had a $3,000 ventilator. We know that they had developed it. We know that they had spent $10 million developing it. We know that a company had that ventilator, had the design, had the prototypes. And we also know that when the need went away, or so it seemed, that company got acquired and the acquiring company shut the program down. And suddenly that $3,000 ventilator design was completely gone and unavailable. And we had to ramp back up as a country to figure out how to make enough ventilators when that was the need. And so they could come out and they could say, we need more ventilators. We need more masks. They're not saying that. What they're focusing on instead is maintain sufficient quantities of key medical technology inputs. I like this, including semiconductors, plastics, and medical grade packaging needed for patient care. Those are actually the raw materials you need to ramp up production of whatever it is you need when the time comes, when the crisis comes. So this is one that I, at least at a personal level, can feel pretty good about. Semiconductor chip supply, obviously still an issue today. They want to increase the supply chains, bolster trade agreements, etc. But I do think that's a good use of effort, which is get those raw materials accessible. Make sure we got access to those raw materials. Accurate diagnostic tests also coming out of COVID-19 want to focus on reimbursement rates. I found this interesting. There was this Protecting Access to Medicare Act that created an unsustainable, AdvaMed calls it, payment system. Again, if you don't have the payments figured out, you don't have a product. I think anybody who's involved in early stage discovery, market discovery would tell you this. You have to understand what your market is. You have to understand who's going to pay for it. But if you don't have that, or you have a payment system that's hard to understand or just can't be maintained, you're not going to be able to get these things out there. So they want to take these actions, reauthorizing this Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Act to make sure that there is access to diagnostics. Well, when we see the word startups, we get excited, but here's the thing. There's policies that make life harder or easier for startups. Now, if you don't like startups, then you don't want those policies through, but if you do, it probably makes sense to you. Payment policies that promote adoption of innovative technologies. The FDA's total, we're going to talk about this in just a minute. I can never remember this acronym, TAP. We'll talk about it in a second. But help FDA to make sure this gets implemented well. Keep SBIRs and STTRs going. Preserve tax policies that encourage investment in small MedTech companies. And ensure that non-compete agreements from the FTC don't put small companies at a competitive disadvantage. We're going to talk in a minute about the total life cycle pilot program here in just a moment. The next one is to strengthen regulatory processes to make sure that medical technologies reach every patient. That's the aspirational statement. What's really happening here? They want FDA to have enough staff. We've talked about this before. You can't review things timely if you don't have enough staff to review them. They want to streamline the review process. And there's another set of things that have been passed that they want to see implemented. Now, this one has been increasingly on my mind. Close the care gap for underserved communities. The gaps in care and outcomes between those served in our best facilities and those in underrepresented and vulnerable populations are unacceptable. Yep, that's clearly the case. The point that they bring up that I think needs increased focus, because people will come to all sorts of different conclusions. Oh, we need more of this and more of that and more of everything. And it may all be true. Like, it's all to be determined. But this is an upstream concern. This is one that flows down. Enhance diversity in trials. We've talked about this with artificial intelligence and machine learning. We've talked about this with pulse oximeters. If a demographic group is underrepresented, you're going to clear a device. It doesn't even work correctly for that group. So how's the care downstream going to be? And it is good and fine to talk about what that looks like at a local level. it is good and fine to talk about how we do that and how we undo the gaps in care and outcomes. But if we're not even doing the trial in a way that makes the device work for a particular demographic, like what are we even doing, folks? So I think this is very important. How far upstream can we get? How far upstream can we get into the design and development of these devices to make sure that the devices work for particular demographics? Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about that one. Sterilization processes. Well, we reported a few weeks ago about the EPA regulations, and I like how they talk about it. We have to be able to sterilize devices. You can't compromise community health either at an environmental level or at a device availability level. Both need to be there. And so this is a really important one. Finally, tax laws. Keep tax laws at pace with MedTech innovation. There's some research and development cost stuff. It turns out that you can't amortize it like you used to be able to. Maybe not the thing that makes you happy or keeps you up at night, but if the tax laws don't incentivize research and development, they disincentivize it. And that's what they're talking about there. So more on this next week. What I want to be able to tell you at the end of next week is how are the congressional delegations, at least from Michigan, responding to these kinds of asks? Here's what your medical device industry, your MedTech industry is asking for, Congress. How do you respond? Hoping to give you some frontline reporting on that come next week. Next up, our email inbox was absolutely flooded with FDA announcements about portable bed rails, adult bed rails. And when you see a dozen line items about bed rails, you say to yourself, something must be happening here. So let's dig into this a little bit. Of course, you may or may not be making bed rails, but you might be making a product, investing in a product, mentoring a product. You also might have a loved one in a care facility where a bed rail is being used. And FDA, there must have been a lot that has happened recently. There's also a standard out there that's worth knowing about. But they talk about entrapment risks. It turns out that these bed rails, with all their cool styling and accessible ways to bring the rail up and put it in the right position, just like cribs. Remember years ago? I don't know. Was this the thing in your childhood, Steve, that cribs and how the crib was designed just turned into like a big hot point issue?
I'm thinking that was a little after.
Yeah. I think back when I was a kid, it was just like Wild West. Like, you got a bar up there, at least the kid's safe, right?
I'm trying to think which country it is. Somewhere in Europe has a simple solution for that.
Oh, what's that?
Cardboard box.
You just put the kid in a cardboard box.
Well, new mothers get a cardboard box full of supplies, and in the bottom of it, there's a mattress. So that's the baby's first crib.
Really?
Is the box that all these support goods come in.
No joke.
And the risk of entrapment in a solid, shallow cardboard box with a mattress in it is negligible.
Because there's nothing to get entrapped in.
There's nothing to get entrapped in.
That's okay. I'm gonna have to look that one up. We're bringing that one on the show next week. I need to know about European cardboard box cribs.
I want to say it was one of the Scandinavian countries.
That doesn't surprise me. They're the ones who have the tradition, which you leave the kid out in the pram in sub-freezing weather outside the door, right? Like that's how they get their sunshine. Oh man, we're getting way off track here, but we're gonna look that one up for next week because we got to find that one. I want to know about the cardboard box cribs. But yeah, a lot of these bed rails that are so cool looking, they're designed with all these features. They have entrapment points, which is tragic. It turns out that the F318617 standard from ASTM addresses this. So we always like to call out standards when there are standards that make something safer, especially when they're voluntary. We'd rather not have the government coming in and saying, here, we got to do something about this. It's lovely when industry says, here's a standard. And the government goes, cool, let's follow it. That'd be great. So hopefully this will help. Here are some recommendations. since this is something that you might not be making, but you might actually have somebody who is using, here's what FDA, this is direct from them, recommends. So if you have somebody who is using an adult portable bed rail, this is more just for public interest here, check whether they comply with the ASTM F3186-17 standard. So you can actually look on the product labeling or whatever else for this ASTM F3186-17. And if you find that, you could feel a little bit better about those bed rails. Note that just because it passes a standard doesn't mean that they're all interchangeable. So you could look and see, does this look like this fits correctly? You would need to check with the manufacturers to know that it's actually compatible. There are age, size, and weight limitations. To the point, Steve, that you just made, I mean, a cardboard box might work for an infant, right? But we're not necessarily recommending it. Just want to say, this is not medical or legal advice. But it's not going to work for an able-bodied adult who might be, drowsy on some medications, right? So every solution has limitations when it comes to age, size, and weight, and you need to check that. Install the rails per the instructions, insert the safety straps are attached, inspections, cautions, because a soft mattress can be a slip point where you slip through by the mattress. Look for gaps, etc. It's pretty common sense stuff, but because the FDA was calling this out, and apparently there's a lot of issues with this these days, we thought it's worth bringing to attention too. If you're a manufacturer of a bed rail company, and I got to say, we've talked to so many companies who want to make a better bed rail of some form or another, or for a specific use or application. What is the recommendation here? It's not a big surprise. It is follow ASTM F3186-17 right there. Do that, and company, startup company, medical device company, there is actually a testing guidance right here. Bed rails, testing guidance. Guidance for industry and FDA staff. Hospital bed system dimensional and assessment guidance to reduce entrapment. So, FDA has guidance. ASTM has a standard. And that would be a real good thing to pay attention to. There's also a 60601, IEC 60601-2-52 medical electrical equipment standard that applies to basic safety and essential performance of medical beds. So if you're doing that, bed rails, or if you have somebody, a loved one who uses a bed rail, worth checking that out. And if you don't, why is this at all of interest or use? Because it's just another example. There are risks associated with the use of medical devices. There are standards that industry comes up with to try to address these risks. It's far better to be cognizant of those standards, try to implement them early so that we're not all playing catch up when people are getting harmed and then going, oh, we should have done something. As these standards become consensed by FDA, it becomes our obligation as developers to follow these standards. Because otherwise we're likely to get asked, hey, the standard is out there. Why didn't you follow it? And so that's those are the news items from FDA today. I just noticed here. Are we gonna do this now, Steve? I just noticed we got a little link here. Are we gonna do this live?
You can if you want.
I could do it if I got to make the decision live on the air. Oh my! And this is from BBC. I think I can take this. I think I can take this risk. We're gonna do this here. Give me 1 second to bring it up. This is from 2013. That's 10 years ago. How can that be 10 years ago? That's terrifying to me. But look at this. For 75 years, this is 2013, Finland's expectant mothers have been given a box by the state. It's like a starter kit of clothes, sheets, and toys that can even be used as a bed. Wow. And some say it helped Finland to achieve one of the world's lowest infant mortality rates. Wow. You nailed that, Steve. That's fascinating. something like that. Never. I don't think in the U.S. with our regulations we would be able to offer that. I don't think if we offered a cardboard box, I think FDA would be knocking on our door, which probably prompts a fascinating conversation. How do you judge appropriateness? There's the contents of the box. Wow, it's like a care package for new moms. Look at this. Mattress, the box that doubles as a crib, snowsuit, hooded suit, socks and mittens, bodysuits, bath towel, nappy set, picture book, etc. Wow. Okay, that was great, and did that live. So, why Finnish babies sleep in cardboard boxes? I wonder if any of you listening have had any experience or exposure to that. I would love to hear more about that. I'd love to hear more. Again, none of this is legal or medical advice. We are not recommending any of this. We have to say that because somebody might take that as an idea that somebody here said you should make your baby sleep in a cardboard box. We're not saying that. Well, I appreciate that, Steve. Thanks for bringing that up. We'll take a moment here and pause for any items that folks may have who are listening online, either on Zoom or on YouTube, the great YouTube, just to see what may be out there. We'll give it just a moment to see if there's any comments or questions, announcements that people have about what's going on in your organization, and we'll give that just 30 seconds more in case there's any. I'm not seeing any hands right now. So I think what I want to do is I want to thank you for being here on MedTech Crossroads. We are going to talk next week about what we learned on Capitol Hill, and as usual, all the FDA news. Talk to you soon.